I'm delighted and happy to introduce my colleague, Rodger Watson, who is Deputy Director of the Design Out Crime Research Centre at the University of Technology, Sydney. Design Against Crime and the Designing Out Crime Centre have had a very close relationship, so I'm really looking forward to what you might say today. Thank you. So over to you.
Thanks, Lorraine, and thank you for the invitation to come today. I've really enjoyed the day so far. It's really been a great experience for me to see the two areas of design and restorative justice come together. I think in my learning about design, often it is combining things that leads to new solutions and new ways of looking at things. I'm going to present a bit on my PhD research and a bit on the work that Designing Out Crime has done in the last 8 years. As Lorraine mentioned, it's a new centre compared to Design Against Crime, and Lorraine and Adam and Paul and Marcus and others were really generous with their time in helping us establish. So what I'm about to show, I guess, is it's the first time we've been in touch for a couple of years, so hopefully you'll be proud. But my personal journey in this sector started 13 years ago. I started, after studying psychology as my undergraduate degree, I started working in public service in the Victims' Compensation Tribunal in New South Wales. And I started there using my undergraduate degree of psychology in working with victims of crime on the processes around funding and counselling and financial compensation. One of the case studies I'll give later revisits that with a project that we did last year. It was mentioned before that nurses are very empathetic as a discipline area, as a practice area, and that they burn out. I kind of burnt out after 3 years in that job. It was a really challenging job, really intensely rewarding, but also quite challenging. And I needed to find a better way of working. So within the same department, I moved over to crime prevention, which is where I first started reading about people like Paul Ekblom and the work of this centre. But I got there and I realised that actually, psychology, yes, it's useful, but actually it's criminology that this practice area needs, or I needed to be able to practice within the area. So whenever I change jobs, I do a new degree. So I did a Master's of Criminology, and I learnt about situational crime prevention that Lorraine talked about before, and I learnt about restorative justice. After a few years in that job, I got a bit frustrated, I guess, with the discipline of area of criminology. It wasn't providing me as a practitioner necessarily with the tools I needed to solve the problems that were coming to me as a practitioner. And it was a bit frustrating. I didn't have the answers then, and perhaps I still don't, but it was so frustrating that I took a secondment at the University of Technology, Sydney, at this strange centre that I'd barely heard of, even though it was funded by my department, called Designing Out Crime. When I got there, I saw a bunch of people working within a design methodology, and I saw a bunch of people who were drawing on the discipline of design in order to solve the problems that I'd been struggling to solve as a practitioner. So they were using design on crime problems and coming up with more innovative and radical solutions than I had been coming up with and my colleagues had been coming up with using criminology problem-solving approaches. So that's kind of where I realised, okay, I better do another degree. So I'm in the final stages, hopefully, of my PhD in design. And I'm just going to share really quickly a couple of the principles that I learned in my studies about design. So there's different types of problems. And that's really at the fundamental struggle or pain point within criminology as I was practicing it. We didn't have lots of different problem-solving methodologies. We only had a small number, but there's many different types of problems. I won't go through all of these. These are fairly universal outside criminology, I guess. But one way of explaining the different types of problems that there are is Stacey in 2000. Stacey talks about problems that are open. So it's really hard to say, actually, that's the problem. It's hard to draw a circle around the problem and say, actually, that's the problem. They're dynamic, so they shift around in time. You can't stop the world, come up with a solution, and then implement. And they're networked. There's more than one problem owner, and there's more than one person or stakeholder group that can be involved in the problem and the solution. When it boils down to it, there's, I guess, two types, if I try and simplify it. There's complicated problems, so problems that can be broken down and understood. Engineers are really good at these problems, and the Airbus is a great example of a complicated problem. Every element of that can be broken down and understood. And if you printed out the manual, it'd probably weigh more than the plane itself, but it can still be understood. Complex problems can't be understood in that way, so there's really no point using the same approaches that we use for complicated approaches on complex problems. And it all comes down to logic and the direction in which we think. So my professor and our director, Kay Storrs, talks about the difference between deduction, induction and abduction. And induction, broadly speaking, induction and deduction go from left to right. So they look at what actions are taking place, they look at how we might arrange ourselves, and they look at why. So they travel really from left to right. And as an organisation, many organisations are set up in this way. So they have their values and they're fixed. They have their working principles and they're pretty much fixed. There's some autonomy around the actions, and if we want to refine those actions, there's processes in place to do what we already do better. Abduction goes the other way and allows us to think, rethink the values of an organisation, the working principles and the actions. And design is a process, I think, that is more abductive than deductive or inductive. So when we talk about values and shared values, these are really what we call designing outcome, the themes in a situation. I'll do more on that soon. Also been looking a bit at innovation literature, because if we're talking about problem solving, where there's a lot of synergies between that discourse and the types of design and different types of problem solving. So in innovation literature, there's incremental innovation, which is very important. It might be around process or materials in the manufacturing industry, and organisations might get 4% a year better at what they do through incremental change. And that's a good thing, because over 10 years that's 40% better. In the middle ground, it's about transformational change, so rethinking working principles. And at the radical end of the spectrum, it's rethinking the organisational values. So, okay, there's different types of innovation. There's also different types of targeting those different changes. And design, the Danish design ladder, which some of you might be familiar with, talks about design as product, process and strategy. So there's also layers of learning. This is kind of the triple loop adapted from the work of Schoen and Agris. Triple loop learning is that in the first step, okay, we're doing what we do to solve a problem, and we learn from our mistakes and we adjust our actions. But if that doesn't work, and if that doesn't solve the problem, then we need to go another loop and look at, are we using the right practices to solve our problems? Adjust those, learn from that, problem solved. If not, then actually we need to rethink our very reason for being and the core, the values of the situation. So triple loop learning, and they require different approaches to rethink. This is not an exhaustive list at all. It's actually pretty sparse, but what I'm trying to show here is that there's roughly 2 problem-solving camps. On the left side of the screen, there's the rational problem-solving approach, which I was very familiar with as a practitioner within criminology. And on the other side, reflective practice, which I was completely not familiar with. The models or the approaches to problem solving on the left, just to take one example, the divide and conquer. This is one that I was using in government in practice. So when we had a problem, we'd map it out and we'd break it down into small parts. And then we'd optimise the government resources that we had at our disposal to better solve it. Now, it's a pretty solid problem-solving approach. It should be part of a business-as-usual portfolio approach. The Babylonians thought it was pretty hot as well, because they wrote about it in 200 BC. When I started learning that there were other ways of solving problems, I was horrified, because we in government were using problem-solving approaches that had been around for millennia and been documented for millennia. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, these problem-solving approaches had been used for ages as well, but it was really the design and the engineering research in the 60s and 70s that led to this canon of work around reflective practice. So Donald Schoen, the notion of framing, how you frame a problem determines how you frame the solutions. Now, as organisations, sometimes we have moments of reflection, and we have to reflect in action and reflect on our own action. I show this slide because it's an example of how a big organisation, the US government, changed the way they solve problems. So it's JFK with a bunch of generals, and it's a photo from the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is used in business literature quite a lot as a case study around groupthink. So what happened was, with the Bay of Pigs invasion, the administration was fairly new, and certain things happened in the environment which meant that a certain policy that the previous administration had developed should be enacted. So, okay, we've got a certain problem and we've already got a solution, let's implement that solution, which is what they did. It was a complete disaster and almost led to World War III. But as an organisation, they learnt that actually they need a different way of solving problems. So when the Cuban Missile Crisis came around, all of the generals were off with the president's brother in a bunker for a week trying to solve the problem, while the president was with a bunch of other people thinking differently about a different solution. And in the end, the solution wasn't a military solution, even though it was a military problem. It was a different type of solution, and World War III was averted, thankfully. Now, in crime prevention practice, speaking from my experience, this is one of the dominant problem-solving methodologies, the SARA model. So scan the environment for what other people have done with similar problems. Analyse which of them is going to be the best fit for your problem, respond by implementing it, and then assess its effectiveness. Again, not a bad problem-solving approach. Should be in anyone's practice kit, but what if no one's actually solved that problem before, or what if it's a new problem? There's no mechanism here for creating a really new solution. So if we limit ourselves to what we've already been done, then we're only ever going to be able to optimise our current approaches. So it's that single loop learning. We're only going to be able to get better at what we're already doing. Here's an example of why that's bad, and this is a case study that I was actually part of in my previous role within the department. I was part of what we call the whole of government working group to address alcohol-related violence in a suburb of Sydney called King's Cross. And this is one of the things that came out of that. This is a court cell, but on a Friday and Saturday night, it now is used, or until very recently was used as a drunk tank. I'm new to design. I draw, but I don't draw very well, so forgive me. If you're out in King's Cross and you're drunk, and the police tell you to go home and you refuse, then they can take you down to the station, put you in a car. I swear that's a car. Drive you 2.5 kilometres to Central Local Court through pretty heavy traffic, have you assessed by a medico, and then handed over to a sheriff who then locks you in a cell for 4 hours. When you come out, if you're okay to go home, they fine you $200. Based on publicly available information about how much that will cost, it costs about $1,000 to do that. Now the problem is there's 30,000 young people out in that suburb, and there's only 8 drunk tank cells. So this is an answer to the question, what tools can we give police to better do their job? But it's not an answer to the question, how can we stop alcohol-related violence or reduce alcohol-related violence? It's just not going to be effective. But this is the one that is on the front page of our equivalent of the Daily Mail as the government's new approach. Embarrassing, right? But it is an example of this way of solving problems. So if we get stuck in that loop of, I can't remember who said it, someone in the room might know, but doing the same thing all of the time despite failing, it's a sign of madness. So someone said that. So if we keep failing and keep using the same approach, that's crazy. So we've got to look for other ways of solving problems. And the methodology that we've been developing, drawing on the work of these guys, is frame creation. And it's a methodology that we use with government organisations and with the public and with users to rethink the problem in order to find new solutions. I'll give an example which shows some of the techniques that we use around empathy, and then another, just two quick examples before I wrap up. So, here's another one. So frame creation, it's based on this notion of abductive thinking. So within normal problem solving, or within the SARA model, you're only really looking at what. You're only really looking for a new what to do within your organisation. With abduction, you're really throwing everything up in the air and saying, okay, our organisational values need rethinking, our working principles need rethinking, and our actions need rethinking. So it's a methodology to rethink all of those things. A colleague in France, who I was just with, in her recent book said that abduction creates, deduction explains, and induction verifies. So this is us. Lorraine and I visited this workshop when she was visiting us. Adam was in another one on the other side of town. But this is a workshop that we did in 2012 in the King's Cross Hotel. So we were looking at the problem of alcohol-related violence in King's Cross with a bunch of conference participants as part of our design methodology. Very different to the way I was working previously on this very problem, which was in a government office, not on site at all, at a table with everyone sort of putting up their organisational flag, defending their patch. Very different way of working. This is the methodology. I won't go through it. I'll just dwell on the ones that are highlighted in red. So this is a process to rethink a problem and therefore create a new way of approaching it. The really core part of it is the themes. The themes are the commonly held human values. So if we can create empathy around the common themes to the people in the problem, that gives us our design values. And then we ask the question, how can we reframe this problem and how can we approach it? So really quickly, in this process, the archaeology is a history of past attempts. It's what have people done before, to what extent have they been successful. The paradox, which was mentioned before, is the unsolvable. So why has this problem been so hard to solve? We as designers aren't going to be any better at solving the problem than the people who've been trying to solve it already. So understanding that paradox and putting it to one side and not trying to solve it, that's a pretty key step. The context is the group of stakeholders that have been trying to solve the problem, and the field is a broader network of stakeholders, organisations or groups or people who could be involved in a solution, so really opening up the problem. The themes, as I said before, are the commonly held values amongst those groups. Frames is the new way of looking at the problem and the solution. Futures is our design exploration, where we go, okay, if we were going to frame this problem as this, how would we approach it and what are the number of actions that we would take? Transformation is basically implementation, but transforming the problem. And integration is making sure that this process gets part of the organisational toolkit of learning and solving problems. So within my team, we're a multidisciplinary team, and when I came to designing our crime in a management role, I was managing architects and other psychologists and designers and historians. Now, I really didn't know what all of those people were good at. We worked together for probably 2 years, I think, based around this methodology. And then we looked back at all of the all of the projects that we'd done and did an audit of the methods that we'd used. So it's all about what each discipline brings to this methodology. And I've got some of these methods here, and I'll distribute them. But the reason we did that was because each of these steps requires different approaches and different tools and different methods. If we're talking about empathy, a number of these methods are about forming empathy, and there's many different ways of doing that. Just to give you an idea of what I'm about to throw at you, this is one of the method cards. There's about 32, and they can be strung together with the client or just in the team to show a non-linear process. And that's really important coming from government land where a problem-solving approach is a linear approach. But showing that different methods will be used at different stages, and that, okay, we're going to go down here and it might be a dead end, but we need to do it in order to explore that. So each method card on the back has a case study, the case study that it was used in. It has an internal expert, so this one is Lucy Caldwell, who's the historian. The name of the method on the front, so tried and tested, a history of past attempts. Why would we do that? To understand what's been tried before, what has and hasn't worked, and why. It has guidance on how to do it, when to do it, and it should fly. So, yeah. Now, I implore you, eyes front, because this will hit you in the face if you're not looking. Yeah, they're not going very well, are they? Oh, look at that. Now, please pass them around so that you get an idea. The reason I show that is, I guess that in the earlier, all through the day today, we've heard of different tools to unearth empathy and create empathy in the process. I want to give an example of one tool that we use, and it's a theme identification tool that we use in a workshop setting after implementing a bunch of those methods. Now, we use it in a workshop setting with the partner organisation and with a stakeholder group. The case study I'm using here is the King's Cross case study, and this is data that we took from that workshop that I showed before. So in this tool, this is identifying the context and field stakeholders, very simple stakeholder identification tool. We call it the fried egg, I'm not sure why. In the yolk of the egg are the organisations who've been working on it before, who tried and been involved in it. On the outside, the yolk of the egg are some of the stakeholders who could be interested in being involved in a solution. We then ask the question, what's important to these stakeholders? Not in relation to the problem, because we're trying to move away from the problem. And one word answers, what are their organisational drivers? If you work in an organisation like that, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What are the personal motivations of all of the people involved at this level? We then do a bit of clustering using hermeneutics to identify which concepts are like and clustering them together. We move into phenomenology then by giving them names. So what is this cluster called and why? And this is starting to abstract away from the problem further, which gives us space to be creative. So in this example, one of the clusters was fun, experience, friends, vibrancy, diversity, being seen. In the workshop process, we've got a number of ways of facilitating the naming of these clusters, but generally it's just, is there one of these concepts that stands out, or if you add all these together, what does it actually mean? In this example, this cluster to us spoke of identity forming. So experience, fun, friends, vibrancy, that sort of added up to identity forming. So then, okay, it's about identity forming. We're not experts in identity forming, but who is? The arts. So we read books, we scour the internet for cheesy 80s songs about identity forming. We find movies that are about identity forming, to deepen our understanding of what identity forming is. And then we rethink, well, is it really about identity forming? And in this case we thought, well, actually it's about a rite of passage. In King's Cross, 30,000 young people going out, having a good time. It's about rite of passage. So that workshop technique and the follow-up that I explained is our way of forming empathy around a problem. It's one of the tools that we use around forming empathy around a problem. So to look at the problem as it was presented as a problem of alcohol-related violence. Okay, so alcohol-related violence, what are we going to do? We use police, we'll use legislation to reduce alcohol. But actually by talking with a bunch of the stakeholders, the young people included, who were going out, we realised that it was deeper than that. It was really about a rite of passage. And then knowing that, we asked the question, well, who's good at providing experiences around a rite of passage and around identity forming? And the answer to that was music festival organisers. Okay, so if we look at this problem as a music festival, who can we ask? So if that's the problem frame, what's the solution frame? And the solution frame was event management. So if you're going to manage King's Cross as a music festival, you would close off the street, you'd have public toilets. There's currently only two, or previously only two public toilets in King's Cross for 30,000 people. You'd have a street fair type atmosphere, a bunch of things, crowd control, you'd have bump in, bump out transport, a bunch of things that a discipline area that's already out there is good at doing. We're calling this the beehive model. I do know why, because it looks like a beehive. This is a way that we use to move from the existing problem frame over to a new frame. Now in that example, the old problem frame was alcohol-related crime. The old solution frame was crime prevention. So the solutions were more police and security, drunk tanks, tougher laws. The scenarios that played out in were crime prevention partnerships, the government things that I was involved in as a public servant. The goals there were to reduce opportunities for crime, and the values, so those themes that were working within that were around security and safety, and it just wasn't working. So by coming at it from understanding identity and vibrancy as the themes, we were able to create new scenarios, new goals, sorry. So to create a thriving late night economy became the new goal of the partner organisation. So the city would then create a scenario where they are the event manager, and a bunch of other solutions would come out of that. So that happened a few years ago. It's a bit of an old case study, but I like to show it because it's a nice clear one. They developed a policy, 200 action items, a bunch of stuff that's being implemented. The next case study I want to show you is... what does that mean? Is a project that's currently live we're doing with Corrective Services New South Wales. This is a maximum security prison. The problem came to us as we've had the same boss for 30 years. He had a brilliant career. He worked his way from being a prison guard up to commissioner. Great story. But he brought the mentality of a prison guard all the way to commissioner. So it was always about security. It was always about detention and punishment. So this is the education facilities that they had. A new commissioner came in and said, we want to create the education experience for rehabilitation. And we want to do that by building new spaces. So can you help us with that? So they'd already rethought their values and had a new frame, but we helped them with the how, the working principles. So using co-design methods, we worked with prison guards, we worked with the Commissioner's Office, we worked with prisoners, we worked with teachers to design what this is. But we really needed to know, well, what are the themes? So the themes that we found were about connection or reconnection and identity again. The themes that would help the prisoners move from being a prisoner back to citizenship. So this became the reframe that we did of the solution. It became more about a pathway of rehabilitation rather than just about a classroom. Prisoners built it as part of trade qualifications. It got craned into a prison about a year ago now. And this is kind of what it looks like. This circle in the front here was designed after exploring the notion of learning in Aboriginal communities. They have a way of sharing knowledge through the community. So when new knowledge comes into the community, they first share it with everyone. Then they break into smaller groups and discuss what that means to them, and then they come back together as a big group. So the whole space was programmed around that because it's a pretty good learning model, but also the population of this prison is majority Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander. So we need to be responsive to that. Instead of having straight rows of desks, we built it so that the tables couldn't be put in straight rows, so to disrupt that learning teaching model. I can't show you any photos with actual people in it, but I can show you evidence that it's being used because they're planting tomatoes and eating them. In the yard there. The second cohort has just graduated. So the second cohort of learners going through doing really basic numeracy and literacy to get them up to a Year 10 standard so that they can access other education programs. Again, this model we use to both reflect on our process, but also we use it in action now. The different frame there, so the problem frame that came to us was about creating a new learning space, and we reframed that into a learning journey. And the solution frame we used was a learning pathway. And the themes that we used through empathising with the prisoners, empathising with the different stakeholder groups was identity and reconnecting back out to the outside world. The last case study I want to give, if I retired now at the tender age of almost 37, I'd be really happy with my career in the public service, because when I started out, I was a clerk answering phones to victims of crime. And last year I had the fortune to direct a transformation project with the department, radically redesigning the way the criminal justice system works with victims of crime. This has just been released. There was an election, so it was under embargo for months and months and months. This has just been released to the public, and I just want to share some of it with you. The way we ran this was similar to what we've heard today from the other presenters. We got a bunch of stakeholders together who are involved in the problem, so people from the department, but we also got victims and victims advocates together and ran them through a process of rethinking what the criminal justice system could be, with the victim at the very centre of the process. So this is our workshop, and we use lots of post-its, and we use post-its to get people to get their ideas out and to abstract away from the problem. Quite often, the biggest challenge is getting people to step away from the problem and to empathise. So whenever we have workshops like this, the first thing we ask them is to take off your organisational hat and just be a human for the day. You can put your organisational hat on when you leave, if you like, but we're all just equal humans. If we don't do that, then people are forever defending their organisational territory, and they won't let go of their job title. So uniforms are banned, and so are metaphorical hats. In this case, working with the department, we've put forward a package of solution directions that will be prototyped and developed by the department with us, hopefully, around these sort of six areas. So improving the court experience. The prisoner or the defendant gets their own seat. The victim doesn't currently. So a simple thing is to treat the victim with at least as much dignity as the offender, and to acknowledge their presence in court. giving victims a greater voice through different statement options. So if they don't want to go to court, if they don't want a special seat, what are the other options that they can have? Offering immediate support and recovery. So back in the day when I was working at Victim Services, we had two options. We could provide counselling and we could provide money. Now, money can be transformative to some people, and it does work, I guess, acknowledging from the state that something bad happened and we believe you and here's some compensation. But it's not necessarily going to solve the problem. So what if we keep that as an option, but also have other options? Providing advice on reporting. Not every victim of crime wants to report a crime, but it's probably good to have the option to talk with someone about the consequences or what happens when they do report a crime. So having a special service around that. Also targeted help for victims of property crime. Property crime rarely solved, but can be pretty damaging to a person as far as their sense of safety goes in their home. And also, this is a good one, judicial education around empathy for victims. So how can we engage the judiciary around understanding the needs of victims and understanding what victims want within an experience within the criminal justice system. So this is a package, is now going through government, and I hope next time to show you a bunch of stuff that's happened. But again, with the model. So the old problem frame was victims are hurt, and the solution frame was compensate. And we do that through compensation and counselling. The scenario we used to do that was that victims would apply for assistance. The goals there were to recognise that an unlawful had happened and it had caused damage. And the values that informed that were around recognition and compensation. So through this workshop, rethinking the very values of the organisation, we realised it was again about identity and freedom. Freedom from violence, freedom from crime. So that needs a different set of goals, different set of scenarios and a different set of actions in order to create that. So creating an experience that gives justice, there's a typo there, and the feeling of justice. The scenario was the program. So there's now a program to transform the criminal justice system to be victim focused. So a complete rethinking of the working principles. And some of the initial solution directions I've already been over, but better court experience, more options, immediate assistance, advice, targeted help, and educating the judiciary. So there's a case study book out only just a couple of weeks ago by our director, which really goes into depth about our methodology and gives case studies around it. I haven't seen it in any bookshops, but it's definitely online. I guess for me, what I learned as a public servant was that it's not about defending the process or implementing the process, it's about solving problems. And if the process that we have at the moment isn't working, then we really need to think that. We need to rethink the process. And if rethinking the process doesn't solve the problem, then we need to rethink our very values. So for me, as a public servant and designer, they're the things that I now have the pleasure to share with public servants through workshops, through capacity building. And I really think that by improving empathy within public servants and giving them some tools in which to do that and a process in which to apply that, I hope that we can better solve our problems. So that's all from me. Thank you.